Welcome to Be a Voice. I'm Brick Carpenter, and this is Usula Media. Thanks for joining me today. As we continue on this season with our episodes with people who have switched gears, I am really stoked to be sitting here today with a person who has experience in switching gears and also a person who is really good at it because he embraces it. So today I'm sitting here with Harry Cunnane, right? Cunnane, right?
Cunnane, you got it.
Cunnane. And you know, the reason I knew that, I mean, for knowing you all this time, it's just the way it's spelled. It's A-N-N-E. That's Anne.
You are in the minority. Nobody gets that right.
They call you Cunnane, don't they?
Cunnane, Cunnane. I get it all, but
which is so
rarely
weird.
Cunnane.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it phonetically, you break it apart. And I try really hard to be good about. I was an English major too, so
Okay.
That happens. So
Yeah.
if I mess up a name, I feel like I did something wrong, like I did this disservice. So, but yeah, Cunnane. But Harry, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I've followed you for a while. You and I both have something in common. We were in a docu-series.
Yep.
Last summer.
Last summer. They
Feels
showed
like it was a
Yeah.
long time ago.
It feels longer than last summer for sure.
Absolutely. And that was by Brayburn, which is a pharmaceutical, and it was Reclaim, Reframe, Changing the Narrative, really around the stigma of addiction and recovery.
Yep.
And that's something that you know a lot about. It's another common ground that we have. So, I know that, but who are you? Who is Harry Cunnane?
Harry Cunnane, who am I? It's probably the hardest question you can ask anybody, right? You know, like where do we start with that?
Where do you want to start unraveling something like that?
Yeah, right. So it's funny, and I think about it from the lens of, the recovery world, right? Like so often we identify with this label of, I'm a person in long-term recovery and
which is
or
a
I'm
part
an
of
addict,
you.
and it's a piece of it, right? And it's an important piece of it. But who am I, right? Like I'm a father. I've got 4 kids. I've got
4 kids.
4 kids. Yes.
What are the ages?
So I have a 13-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and a almost 5-month-old daughter.
Just recently.
You
were on the cusp
a
few months ago. That's right.
We
were at a summit together.
Yeah.
And you were...
we were expecting any day. We ended up, the doctors, I think, were trying to get my wife's hopes up. It ended up being a week after that, but...
I actually followed you on social media then on your stories and stuff. You were doing things to try to exercise her to get the baby going and flow and whatever was happening.
Yeah, my wife was out of patience. Her and the other ones, they were on the trampoline and anything they could. But the baby came when she wanted to come. But yes,
4 kids. That's great.
It's amazing, right? But it's, so again, that who are you question for me is like I'm in recovery. I'm a father. How many years? I'm a son. 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, October was 12 years.
That's amazing. And you have a 13-year-old daughter, so you had her while you were in your active addiction.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
To see that change in that. Was that maybe like the ignite? What ignited you to go into recovery?
It was an important part of it.
Okay.
Right. So I went to treatment 4 days after my daughter turned 1. It was October 30th, 2012. And, it's funny. I was young. I was 22 at the time. And for me, I knew once my drug use was, I knew I had a problem for years. I knew well before I was 22 that I had a problem. And I had this feeling that I just believed, I internalized the stigma on myself hard. Right. So I knew I had a problem, but I didn't know there was a solution out there. I didn't know people recovered. I couldn't identify anybody in my network that was living a life in recovery. I didn't even know what that meant. Right. So I didn't know that, I could ask for help. I didn't know that there were, I didn't know there was anything or anyone out there for me. I just thought I was an awful person and I thought I was going to die this way. But when I found out, I was 20 at the time when I found out that I was going to become a dad, and I'm completely hooked on opioids. My life is in complete shambles. I've dropped out of school. I'm working in a warehouse. Things are not going well.
How long were you in your active addiction?
From probably about 14, 15 to that day, and when I was 22 years old. So it had been a little bit of a run, and for me around 18, so 18 to 22, it just really took off and was a disaster.
Especially those years where you're forming.
Yeah.
Those years are supposed to be those forming years, and those years are supposed to be growing in different ways. And
yeah.
yeah,
I was not growing in many ways.
Right.
My life was shrinking, right? Like I grew up to two incredible parents. I'm the middle of, other things, right? I'm a son, I'm a brother. I've got two brothers. I'm right in the middle child syndrome.
Where are you from originally?
I'm from Glenside.
Oh,
right
okay.
outside of Philly.
So you're local.
Yeah.
Glenside boy, local.
Yeah.
The Cork.
Glenside.
The Cork.
Yeah, we moved from Glenside to Jenkintown when I was growing up, and
Same
that was
thing?
a big move. No, but it's different if you're.
Is it really?
It's
to me, I think of it the same thing because they're
most
right there
people
next
do.
to each other. Aren't
Yeah,
they?
we moved a mile, but it was like we completely transformed, who we were, and anyway.
Nice.
But so like at that time, I grew up this way, and I had great hopes, and my parents put me in good schools, and I had all the potential in the world. So for me, that time from 18 to 22 was really just my world was caving in, right? So like my outlook was shrinking, the possibilities were shrinking, and the reality of where I was headed was getting so narrow. But I remember when I found out, my girlfriend at the time was pregnant. I'm 20 years old. I'm sitting in this apartment in Bensalem, and I'm just like overwhelmed with hope, right? Like this is it. I had been trying to stop using for a while at that point. I didn't tell anybody I was trying to stop because, figured what's the use?
Mm-hmm. Same old story.
Yeah. But I was trying, and I thought that was going to be it, right? And I was convinced that was going to be it. And I found out in a very hard way that was not it. So that first year of my daughter's life was just such a dark time because every day was the reminder that, it wasn't it. I didn't stop. I didn't change. I didn't make a transition in my life. I had a kid, right? But I wasn't becoming the dad that I wanted to be or thought I should be or knew. Actually, at the time, I wouldn't say I knew I could be.
Especially
because
at
I didn't
22.
think I could, right?
You didn't know anything really.
Yeah.
At that
I knew
point.
I looked up to my dad and I wanted to be like him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so, I am, so fortunate to have him in my life. But I just knew at that time I was incapable of living up to the standard that I had for myself. It was impossible.
I like that. To hear that, I don't know if people have those standards sometimes.
Yeah.
Or if they do, I don't know if they place those goals upon themselves to reach those standards. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe why as a person in recovery, even for myself, affirmations are standards to me, and I found that out. But, and it's funny, you said, you didn't know you could recover.
Yeah.
Like me, I thought it was normal to get fucked up.
So did I.
I thought it was normal that I should be like popping pills, drinking beer, partying until 4 a.m, getting up, going to work, and being as functional as I can. I thought that's what everybody did. And the people that weren't doing it, I thought, what was wrong with them?
Yeah.
So to hear you say that, thank you. I feel better.
Yeah.
You just affirmed that, okay, I wasn't, alone. So,
No,
and that's common, I think, for a lot of people to think that.
Yeah, I've got vivid memories of that. Like, especially when I first started out, like those thoughts of like, why isn't everybody doing this? Because it works, right? Like it cut off every feeling that I want cut off. And like, it felt like this is it, right? Like this is what I've been missing, from 0 to 14. Like, why wasn't I doing this the whole time? And then it turned on me.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I thought that was, that was what I needed to just get by.
I also, I always find it really interesting and real admirable, and I respect somebody like crazy like yourself who at the age of 22 you were able to do something like that, because my active addiction started at the age of probably like 16, 17, that cusp, and it didn't end until 30 years later.
Okay.
So I missed more than just the growing years. I missed all my life.
Yeah.
So like I look at somebody like yours and like I actually like find this really strong like connection then, because I want to learn from somebody like that, because they had that ability to do what I couldn't, even though I was successful in my career and in my personal and stuff like that. I wasn't successful in the growing or the stability part.
Yeah.
So good. Congratulations on that.
Thank
man.
you. Yeah,
That's
I think
a lot.
for me, I had, by 22, I wasn't successful anywhere. Like there was not an area of my life that you could point to that was like, oh, it's kind of okay. Like I burn it to the ground. And I think, back to my daughter, the role, and she played a lot of roles, right? But like one of the roles that I think is critical for that was she made me acutely aware of the pain, right? And acutely aware of that I should be doing something different than what I'm doing, right? So like she was this, this kind of force in my life at the time that was just like this physical, visual, constant reminder of, how far I had strayed from who I thought I was or who I thought I could be, should be.
Interesting. When we talk about people, when we talk about ourselves and other people in active addiction, it's so funny because people say, oh, so, you went to treatment, you get into a rehab, which I don't know what, we didn't get rehabbed, which they used to call rehabilitation, but you went to rehab and, now you're back to yourself. And I don't think people realize that we don't even know who ourselves were during that active addiction, especially at that age. Yeah. So, the opportunity to do that, I mean, that, people talk about an aha moment. I don't think there's really just one in people's lives. It's a series of.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the constant for me, like since that day, in 2012 that like I started a process of changing, like it's just been a constant, right? And there's more of these aha moments as I go. But I had a really pessimistic outlook on what rehab was or what even recovery could be. Like I went in just with the hope of like, if I can get off these opioids, like just that, I'll be fine. But I remember somebody saying too, like, you can get your life back. I was like, I don't want that. I don't. There's
nothing. Sucked.
Yeah, like there's like take it, right? So to have the opportunity to like start from scratch and rebuild a life, and again, like to be able to do that at 22 is like it's a miracle. Like it's awesome. Crazy.
It's sick.
It is.
It really is. And so recovery comes in different levels, and people's recovery is all different. My recovery, your recovery, everybody's is different. Yeah. Some people are totally abstinent. Some people are, they are not. Some people are medically treated, whatever. You have been abstinent, sober the whole time. I don't like the word clean. I'm against that word. Okay. That's me.
That's fair.
I really am. Sober is cool, because I always think about like, I wasn't dirty, was I? And but and that's another admirable thing. I think people need to realize that there is a difference, and I think that that swayed me sometimes because I didn't go through treatment. I tried to go through the rooms.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were brutal. They were really brutal.
Sure.
So but so you had that. So that's part of who you are, which that led to a big piece of who you are now, the addiction and the recovery and everything. Yeah. So 22, where did you go to treatment?
So I went to Karen Treatment Centers out in Wernersville, Pennsylvania.
Karen's pretty good.
They're great.
How long did you go there for?
So I thought I was signing up for the, typical rehab 30 days. When I got there, I learned about a continuum of care and aftercare and all these other things. So, I was in treatment there for 30 days, and then I went to a really structured sober living for another 90. So I was away, out of my environment, kind of shipped off for 4 months.
Which I always say is sometimes for some people the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Some people don't need that. Some people I think need that or more. Yeah. And I think that's really the aftercare is so important. So it's cool you did that. Karen has a good aftercare. There's a lot of them out there that do not. Yeah. I'm not here to bash anybody, but Karen does have a good aftercare. But not just that, then, you got out, like after you were done with your, what did you want to do when you grew up at that point? Did you know?
I had no idea. When I got out, I was terrified. I was terrified of going back. I was terrified of what would happen if I, started using.
When you got out, were you going home?
I went back home. So
okay.
So in that, that year before, when my daughter was born, I moved back into my parents. Again, my life is crumbling.
You're in Ben Salem. Most people end up in Ben Salem. I don't understand that. How does Ben Salem be that area?
I don't know. But yeah, I spent, a little bit of time in an apartment off Street Road. And, but anyway, so
They
I
must
moved
have
back.
like banners out some days saying, just come here.
Just check it out. Yeah, it's not quite Northeast Philly anymore. But it's close. So I'd moved back into my parents' house before. So when I got, finished with treatment, I was going back to my parents' house. But, during the time when I was away, my relationship with my daughter's mother blew up, right? So I was going back and, she had been living there too. She wasn't anymore. I was going back to, co-parenting my daughter. And I was going back to this, really entry level kind of like just customer service call center job. And, one of the things that I recognized, so I went away, and that whole time, they took my cell phone away. Right. So like the whole time I'm like, oh man, everybody's probably calling me and this and that. And I remember right before I was getting out of the halfway house, they had let me get like a flip phone, but I turned my phone back on, and wanted to see like how much did everybody missed me. Right. And I had legitimately like three people reached out in 4 months, and it was a dealer. It was one, this girl saying like, hey, yo, Harry, are you alive? And it was my supervisor from work who had, knew what was going on, and just said, hope you're okay. Right. And I remember like I looked through my text messages to her, and it was like every day, just the dishonesty around like, oh, I'm running late. I'm this, I'm that. Right. Like, so I just wanted to try to get back in and just like show up. Right. And I didn't know where that was going to go. Right. But I was like, I have a job. I'm going to go back to this job. I'm going to do everything that I can to be different, right? To just be an honest employee. But, again, it was like a really low paying kind of just basic job. But like I took a lot of pride in it, and I dove into it, and, eventually I, build up the self-esteem to kind of like ask and position myself for more. And, but it's funny, like the first, I think probably 2 years after I got out, like I was afraid I didn't ask for a review or a raise, or like I was just like
humbled.
afraid to, like I was humbled heavily. Right. And I just wanted
stability.
And I just, but I was so fortunate, right? I went back, I moved in with my parents. I was able to get my own place probably like 9 months after that. But, I moved back in with them, and, my mom's like secretly following me to see if I'm going to meetings or what I'm doing at night. And,
really?
like we had to rebuild trust. Yeah. She was, there was no trust when I got home, rightfully so.
And I'm glad you said that, because I do talk about this with, other guests, and, just so happened like most of my guests this season are in recovery. So we talk about it. That's what we know best, and what we could bring the word out. But people forget about the families.
Yeah.
They forget what the families go through. They think the families are just going about their life and going to the holidays, and they're going to parties and to dinner every night. They forget that parents are out there on the streets looking. They're out there spying on their kids to see if their kids are walking the straight and narrow, or if they're alive, or whatever the case may be. And it takes a toll on a parent. It takes a toll on anybody. So your mom was doing that.
Yeah. I mean,
Did you know that?
No, not until years later, right? But what I did know was like I shattered all of the trust, and like my word when I got home meant nothing, right? So like I knew that I had been for 4 months really trying to like actively do this thing and figure out like what does recovery look like for me, and how do I get it? How do I hold on to it for dear life, right? But like she hadn't seen me, right? Like I came home once on a home pass for Christmas. And what happened before I left was like the day I went to treatment was the day they confronted me with a bunch of bank statements showing that I had robbed them, right? Like I was stealing from my parents. So like there was no trust, and, all I knew was, like I know what I'm doing. And I believed enough that if I just keep trying to do the right thing and be honest, then eventually like it'll come back. I didn't think it would come back as well as it has. I didn't think we'd ever get to where we are today, 12 years later, but it was a slow grind.
And that's cool. We want to talk about those 12 years.
Yeah.
But I want to bring it back to something you said that I believe really strongly about. And I tell people that when I do write my posts on social media, I always end it with that. But you use 2 words, and it's 2 words that I don't think people that may not be in recovery they may take for granted,
Yeah.
but it's show up.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult when you're in your active addiction and you're using and you're running and you're whatever you're doing to show up, to be present. That when you do go into, recovery and you are sober and you're seeing things from a different perspective, showing up means all the world to us because we've never did that before.
Yeah.
So, and I'm glad you said that. And people do say it. And I don't think people realize how important it is to show up and be present.
It's huge. I mean, and also like it's for a while, it's all you can offer, right? Like all I had to give was like,
to show
look,
up.
I can show up. I can be here for you. Right. And if I say I'm going to be here, I can actually do it before. Cause like, when I was using, I couldn't show up for anybody.
And that's funny because that becomes your word then.
Yeah.
You said, your word was destroyed.
Yeah.
But when we get out, I always tell people all I had left was my word. And that was through the actions and that's showing up.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So, let's fast forward. So, you were in the family, that's a spiral. That's an episode in itself, I'm sure, for us.
Yeah.
But, when we talk about it, you turned what I always believe, and I am a huge firm believer that turning your pain into some type of purpose.
Yeah.
And making sure that, you become that voice. We were also of the mind frame that we should be recovering anonymously.
Yes.
And that we shouldn't let people know.
Yeah.
And especially, it's going to be embarrassing our families and then ourselves, and it's just shame and the guilt and all that. And that's what happened to me. It almost killed me 5 times, in overdoses, because I did it, quietly.
Yeah.
Everybody else knew, but I didn't tell anybody. So, to recover out loud, and you sort of turned that around and did that, didn't you?
I did. It took a while.
Yeah.
Right? Like for probably the first, it was 5 to 6 years into recovery, that, the way it happened for me, right, was like, I was still at that job. I had moved up in that company and was,
For 5 years?
Yeah. So, and I was in a much higher role and had a lot of opportunity to grow there. And it was great. I was I was off to a really positive career, but I didn't talk about, like nobody I worked with, I didn't talk about it. Being in recovery was not something. Stigma. Like I felt it in recovery 5 years in. Like I knew the way I was living and I felt really good about it. And I was afraid that if I told you I was in recovery, that I would, like, what does that mean? But so, part of my story was, as I was getting into recovery in 2012, my mom was running for, first local office. So she was getting into politics. And then,
so your mother's only been in politics for 13 years now?
Yeah. Yeah.
She's come a long way in 13 years.
She's come a long way.
So the ambition and the drive doesn't fall far from the tree there with you. That's very cool. Because we'll talk about that so people know what we're talking about. Go ahead.
But so in 2018, I'm about 6 years in. She is at the time making a run for Congress for the first time ever, and we're approached by a literary agent who says, "Hey, would you guys be interested in telling your story?" They knew, from family connections about what I had gone through and what we had gone through as a family, and I remember this agent he met us at my parents' house in Jenkintown, and, we sat outside and talked about it for a little bit. My mom and I looked at each other really with the hope of like, look, like if we can just help if one person can identify with this. I thought about, what I mentioned earlier, when I was struggling, I couldn't identify anybody in recovery, right? So that concept of, do I perpetuate that for the next guy, or do I try to recover out loud and actually hopefully, not that my way is the right way, but just that I am one person of many that is vocal about it. So we decided to write it.
Also, people that look like us, whatever the hell that means, aren't supposed to be in addiction.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be that J word or, shooting up and stuff like that. That's not who we are supposed to be. Dictated by who, I don't know. Yeah. But to be able to open your mouth about it, it gives that hope and everything like that. And it's interesting because your mother was making that run for Congress.
Yeah.
And you were approached in 2012 or
2018.
2018. About right. And that was the cusp. That was like the verge of the opioid crisis, overdose epidemic coming into the scene to be a voice about it.
Yeah.
And, to do that, that's also something that's really iffy. That could really raise somebody to the next level or push them back far. And that takes balls.
Well, I think for me, I just went on faith with it, right? Like I thought about, by that point, again, I feel like I caught this recovery thing, like none of it is my doing, right? Like I had access to great care. I had all of the right stuff lined up that I know most people don't have, but I had like all of these dominoes that were lined up. But I also had been in recovery for 6 years, and like, from 2012 to 2018, the shift in the drug supply to fentanyl to like what was happening out there and the friends that, I was losing. It was like, if this is something that I can do, like like count me in. Right. So, because I felt like by almost pure circumstance of like, because it was me in 2012, like, it was a different landscape then, and it's a totally different landscape now. I just felt like I've got to do something.
Yeah.
I've got to do something.
And you did.
And I did.
And you did. That's amazing. And so the book, what's the name of the book?
The book, so we wrote 2 books. One is a, sort of adult memoir called Under Our Roof.
Under Our Roof.
Yeah.
And it's by both you and your mother.
Yeah.
And your mother is, what's Congresswoman?
Yeah, Congresswoman, Pennsylvania's 4th District. So she's just outside of Philadelphia here.
Very cool.
So she ended up, when we started, she wasn't yet elected, but, she was in the process. She was elected in 2018 for the first time.
That's a bold move on your mother's part, too.
Yeah.
To be able to put a book out about that, especially since it's so taboo and stigma.
Yeah.
To put a book out saying that this is my experience, what I did. But then again, that also could be probably one of the smartest moves because it appeals to all the people that are afraid to say me too, or to say it happened to me or in my family. So that's sick. I love that. Yeah. Thank you. I will be honest, I have not read them, but I'm going to. Okay. So the first one is called Under Our Roof.
Under Our Roof. And I'll quick caveat.
Please.
Just to say I'm super proud of her because again, like it's a risky, it could have been. It ended up like the feedback we got, she'll get anyone in the political arena in 2025. You're going to get criticized by half of the people out there for anything. But like that is one thing that we did that like even on social media, which is fueled with, some really nasty stuff. Like the comments we got even on there were overwhelmingly positive, and not positive that we did it, but like the amount of people that were then comfortable getting vulnerable with us about what they were going through, whether it was addiction or not, So.
Isn't it amazing the door it opens? Yeah. I think, the minute I became vulnerable on social media and I had that following of 43,000 and people were listening, it's interesting because the minute that I started sharing, saying this happened to me, it may not have been somebody who was in addiction. It could have been a sexual abuse. It could have been domestic violence. It could have been losing somebody to suicide. But you open that door for others to talk about their pain, to release it because you released your pain. Yeah. So Under Our Roof, what's the second book?
So the second book, which is to me something that, again, probably it sold much fewer copies, but it's different. It's a children's book.
That's all right.
And it is, so it's an illustrated children's book called
Love
You
it.
Were Always Loved. And what
You're Always Loved?
Yeah. And what it is really is, it doesn't talk about, any of the language of, addiction or recovery, but what it talks about is feelings, right? And it's aimed at children who are growing up around someone who's struggling with addiction, right? So like when I thought back, my daughter was 1, and my experience as a father when I was in active addiction was like I loved her to death and I could not show it, right? And I think there are so many people that have grown up in that environment. If you're a kid, you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, the world revolves around you like you feel like it's your fault. So selfishly for my kids, but at the same time, like right when that was happening, one of my closest friends, Jonathan, passed away, and he had a son who's the same age as my daughter. And I just thought about, it's like, man, like, like if only, like he knew, like I hope that they do. Right. But like how much his dad loved him despite, what happened.
I think it's really hard, it's especially for children, and it's really hard for anybody, I feel, that didn't really go through an addiction to understand how difficult it is to express or show our love for other people when it's hard to show. We don't even love ourselves sometimes. So we do love the person, but showing it or expressing it or actually feeling it in a non-tangible yet tangible sort of way, if that makes sense, is very difficult. And I don't think people get that. No. And, you know, and that's what drugs will do. They will numb that feeling of the love too. Yeah. So that's important. So it's a children's book, once again, called You Are Always Loved. You Are Always Loved. Yeah. And where can somebody get these books?
Anywhere books are sold. So you got Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Local bookstore. Always go to your local bookstore.
That's always shop local.
Yes.
Always shop local. So we're local, other than because Barnes & Noble is not a local, but like one of the ones in Philly. Any in Philly here that you know of?
Any of the ones in Philly.
Really?
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. You might have to ask. It's been out a couple of years, so you might need to ask. But yeah, they can still get it if they don't have it on the shelf.
Very cool. So you and your mom wrote both of these books together?
Yeah, we wrote the books, and they're, so the memoir in particular is what we did to try to maintain the integrity of the, of our truth of what we had experienced. Was we created an outline and said, go write about these experiences, right? So, it wasn't trying to make a story fit. It was, hey, remember this event? It was maybe a little chaotic, like, Mom, what did you experience? And then I'll write, what was going on in my side. So you see she knew things were going wrong and, things were off, but she didn't know what was really happening. And so, through that, our stories end up coming together later, right? But it's, it's like, what is a mom going through? What am I going through? Trying to cover it up. And it's, it exposes a lot of those misconceptions and deceptions that we were trying to navigate together.
That's amazing. I love to hear that because there was a documentary done on myself, Phil the Unknown, and they spoke to my mother and they asked her about, and she stated it very well. I was very good at disassociating from my family. Yep. Like I ran to different states. I ran because I didn't want to involve them. And it sucks because I also feel like I deprived myself of my life with them, So that's so cool to hear this stuff. But
I think that part is fascinating, right? Like and I think of that as like a way of, if you're struggling, like if you're out there not wanting to involve them, like comes from a place of love, even though it's, it's probably the last thing that it feels like on your mom's side.
And it's funny and that's where it comes from because you want to protect them.
Yeah.
You don't want them to be a part of it, and you don't want, a part of your chaos, a part of that turmoil that you're bringing into the lives. And I really didn't. So it was really much better. And I think, for myself, it worked out like that. I don't know how I would have. Now, my parents were pretty strict, so I'm not sure how that would have worked out. That's probably why I ran.
You and me both.
So you were at this job, but you left that job. You didn't stay at this job. You took it and you went back to give back, it seemed. And explain that to me.
Yeah. So in the process of, writing the book and processing the fact that, I'm going to now put this out there and we're going to do a media tour and, I'm going to get really public about it.
So you did a media tour, book signing, all this stuff?
Yeah. It was during COVID. So it was, it was a COVID book tour. We did a lot of virtual stuff, which was, it was fine. We did what we could, but, I knew it was going to go out in a really public way. And, just through the process of writing the book and kind of living through it, I came to realize what I was doing, I just wasn't passionate about. Again, I was off on a good career professionally, but it didn't fire me up, so I ended up, took kind of a leap of faith before the book ended up coming out. And not totally recklessly, right? Like I was applying for other jobs, kind of like in the treatment world or trying to come over to behavioral health. I didn't even know what was out there at the time. I didn't know if this is like a profession. I had experience in treatment once, but that was about it.
Right.
But I ended up walking away from that job, without anything fully lined up and was fortunate a few weeks later, I found a job with Karen Treatment Centers where I had gone through as a patient. And that was for me kind of the first, like kind of dipping my toes into this work and understanding, this field.
What role were you hired into?
So I was hired into an outreach role, right? So I had, I had a resume that had sales and marketing and branding experience. And I found somebody from Karen on LinkedIn, and it's like, hey, can we get coffee? I brought my resume. I was like, look, I don't know anything about this field. I don't know what I can do for you guys, but I've got to do something that I'm passionate about. And, started that conversation, wound up getting a job over in New Jersey, doing outreach. And
I can picture that with the personality, starting an outreach.
Yeah.
Especially just, the move of just reaching out to them on LinkedIn, like, let's get coffee.
Yeah.
Like that's a move. That's a move.
Well, yeah. I never thought of it that way, but it is, right? Like that's what it is. And, so for me, it was kind of this first time in my life that, regardless of the role, what was amazing about it was in terms of recovering out loud, like everywhere I went, whether it was in, my local community, my recovery community, my family, or my work, I could be authentically me, right? I didn't have to hide this piece of who I am. And that, since then has really kind of opened the doors to what I do today and the path that I've been on since then. But it's really been to just lean in and, I don't have the degrees. I'm not, clinical. I'm not medical. But I want to bring
experience.
Value. Yeah. It's like, I've got that, and I want to bring value to, to people who are out there that are still struggling, either using or struggling in recovery. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like people that need some help. So like whatever I can do, for me, like that's what fuels me.
So you started this job in outreach, 2018-ish?
Yeah, 2019. So summer of 2019. And, so I did that, talking to transitions, right? So
that's a big switching of gears.
It's July 2019. I sold my house in Wyncote. I was in Wyncote at the time. I moved over to New Jersey.
So, you owned a home then?
Yeah. Yes, I was living.
So now
in
you're a
Wyncote.
homeowner at this point.
I'm a homeowner. Yeah. I mean, my life in those 5 years, in all of the normal kind of like checkbox stuff, had gone really well. I met my wife, Juliet. We got married. We bought a home. We're, at that point, maybe, we were expecting our first together. So it's summer 2019. I pick up. I moved to New Jersey. I start this new job, and I'm still in the process. We're writing the book. It ended up coming out in 2020. But we're doing all of this, and I had the opportunity to grow from there, right? So I took that job, I ran with it. I was able to, be successful. Karen, there was an opening within Karen about 18 months later to do really more kind of fundraising work and some policy work in Washington, D.C. So I went down there and ended up living, I'm now 8 years in recovery. I'm splitting time. I've got my wife and kids in Jersey. I'm sleeping on my mom's couch just to try to do this thing and reestablish myself in a new job again.
Well, here's this 22-year-old kid who was afraid to ask for a raise in his first job in 2 years.
Yeah.
18 months into this job at Karen, which everybody needs to know it's with a C, Karen.
Yes.
It's not a K, it's Caron.
Yep.
Karen Foundation, they call it, right?
Yeah.
Karen Foundation. I just call it Karen, so that's why I know.
Yeah.
But you did this, and not just that. You made that comment like you didn't finish college, which sometimes I think some of the smartest people don't finish college.
Yeah.
It depends on what you're looking for. Yeah. Now you're working, and you're in Washington D.C. working with policy. Yeah. One of the most dreaded things that people ever want to deal with. I mean, myself, that's compliance, and I love compliance, but that's really compliance. How the heck did that happen?
So it was really just kind of following, it wasn't on the path, right? Like if I was looking at where I was headed, it wasn't that. But this opportunity came up, and didn't feel like a perfect fit because, again, I live in New Jersey. I've got to be down there. I took it with, the hope that like I'm going to learn a lot doing this, and it's going to push me out of my comfort zone. I can do this outreach thing. It's going well, but at that point it was kind of on autopilot. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to continue to push and grow. And again, like I got into this to try to make an impact. And so when I thought about policy and kind of like being in DC, it was like, all right, well, in outreach, I'm kind of making impact on one person at a time. It's like, all right, what can we do to push this? My mom's now also in Congress. I'm seeing the the other side from conversations with her of like, all right, how is some of this working and what's happening, and recognizing that like there's not enough people with lived experience at the table most of the time, and so it's like, how can I be useful? What can I bring to this? And so I went down there, and for 2 years, I spent 3 nights a week in DC and the other 4 nights at home, and it was grueling. It was brutal. I had, 2 kids in those 2 years. So my wife is
raising the kids,
just an absolute hero with 2 under 2, at home, and allowing me to just kind of follow this dream of, how can I do more, learn more, and try to help more, so I did that for a couple years with Karen, and I got exposed to, I'll say both from that, but also from when the book came out. What ended up happening was something that I knew deep down, but like I was exposed on a much deeper level to the privilege that I had as somebody who used drugs, right? Like I got through my active addiction with no criminal record. I used right around here. I used all over this city. And, like what I say was my experience with the cops was like, I was treated unfairly fair. Every time I got stopped, they'd look at my ID and they'd say, get out of here. Just go home.
Did you know the name?
No, it wasn't even that. At the time, my mom wasn't in anything. It was just, I lived in a nice, neighborhood in Montgomery County.
Suburbs, go back.
They would just say, just get out of the city. If I see you again today, I'll lock you up. But every time I was just let go.
Wow.
And
good for you.
Yeah.
I wish I had that experience.
But on top of that, it was like, and then when I needed treatment, like I had a bed available that day. I had, the ability to go to treatment long term. I had all of these things that so many people don't have. And then I get into recovery and I don't have the record, right? So it's easier to get, keep a job, maintain a job, get housing, all of these things. So when we did, the book, and I look at, policy, it's like there's so many glaring disparities for people that use drugs that don't have it like I had it.
People who use drugs are treated as criminals.
They are.
And that's basically what it is. There are no rights for some reason.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure where that goes because, it has now been classified as a disease by, the CDC. If they say it, who are we going to argue with them? That's what's going on. And I think people don't realize that there's so much involved with that. So to be able to write policy and to stick, well, number one, would you think that you would ever got into writing policy if it wasn't for your mother being in Congress? Did that have an interest to you, or you just had an interest in learning that? Because that's a hell of a thing to learn.
So and I'm not typically writing it. What I'm trying to do is really just
be a voice for it.
Be a voice, and
that's writing
highlight.
It though. Harry. Let's face it. Because what you do is you tell them. You sit at a table. You sit with them. You sit in front of them. You speak. And you tell them, and they write what you tell them because of that lived experience. Yeah. So you're writing policy, man.
Well, and so I don't know, right? So like,
put that on your resume.
Yeah. So did I think we would go this way? Probably not, right? But also like growing up, my mom always had the dream of getting into public service, right? So like, my dad's father was super active, locally, didn't, but like was really into it. Growing up, like my parents loved it. And, before my mom got into politics, my brother actually did. Right. So like his first job out of college was, before my mom was anybody, he got an internship at the White House under Obama. So, and he grew through the ranks there and was there for 6 years. So like my family was kind of like always surrounded by it. So, so it's probably coming whether I knew it or not. But it's been something that can be incredibly frustrating, but like looking at it, and again, like what I found when I got, into it was just, there's so many pieces of this that aren't typically represented, right? Mm-hmm. Like the people in Washington that have the money are the big pharma companies. It's the places that can afford a lobbyist, and like, people who use drugs are criminalized, and they're not, typically hiring big lobbying firms to speak on their behalf as to like what's falling through the cracks in the policy that we write.
I was at dinner last night with my friend Carla Safransky.
Okay.
She's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Harm Reduction Network.
Yeah.
And we were just talking exactly about this.
Yeah.
And, and that's important for people to know too. Like, if you don't have the funds or the means to have like a high-powered lobbyist in your pocket, or I hate to say it like that because it's not in your pocket, in your corner.
Yeah.
Sorry. It may not happen.
Yeah.
But you started doing this. You're with Karen, but then not just that, you switch gears again.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah. So recently, just really recently, over the past couple of years, I had on the side been doing more consulting work around communications consulting, policy consulting, and so I started this company, Ghost Pepper, a couple years ago, just kind of like as a passion project, so
like a side gig sort of thing.
Side gig, passion project. It was like, it felt like again, I was on and I got another role at Karen, and I was moving up. Career was going well there, but this felt like more of like, all right, this brings all of the different facets of me together in a way that feels more more authentic, right? So
I love that you said passion project. That's awesome.
Yeah. I feel it sounds, as a communications guy.
Well, the minute you said that, I was like, wait a second. I'm like, side gig things are getting paid. Like, Fill the Unknown is a passion project. So I get that. I love that. I take that back. I retract side gig. All right.
Yeah, it's a passion project.
You don't hear me retract shit too much, so we'll take that.
There we go. But yeah, so, a couple, not just a few weeks back, about a month ago, really just took the leap of faith and said, hey, I'm going to go all in on this. I resigned from Karen.
How long ago?
Just a month ago.
Okay, so you had a good job with Karen.
Great job.
Great job with Karen.
Great job.
There you go. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
And people need great job with Karen. You're on the fourth kid. You're waiting for this fourth kid to be born, and all of a sudden, fourth kid's born, and you're like, yep, thank you for everything. I'm going to take this leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I use this word a few times with this interview. But that's ballsy, man.
Yeah. Well, if I look back at my what has happened since I have gotten into recovery, right? Like, it's, for me, like, what I do for my personal recovery, like, all of it is constantly evolving, right? And I just felt, and I if you ask my wife, it was like, it sounds in an interview like, oh, it just happened. It was like, no, like, this was, years in the making and really deliberate and intentional, right? I've got 4 kids and a wife riding on it.
It has to be. Yeah.
It has to be. But no, it is, right? Like, I had an incredible job at Karen, and I love Karen as an organization. I still actually get to do some work with them through my agency now. And, but for me, it was just like, it just felt like it got to the point where it was like, this is what I've got to do. And, I believe that, it is a risk, and I see that, and I see where it could go sideways, but I also see that for me as a person, right? Like, what's been so cool about getting into recovery is the ability to kind of like chart my own path, right? And to take a risk. And like, that, what I have come to is, if it doesn't work out, right, like, I can find another job, but I will at least feel like I gave it a shot. And otherwise, like, for the last couple months before I did make the move, like, the itch was there of like, if you don't do this, you're always going to wonder what would have happened. What would have been if you just went all in and bet on yourself.
I love this because you, like myself, we do public speaking.
Yeah.
Engagements. And I talk a lot about this in public speaking engagements when I talk to people, and I tell them that, like, I don't consider things in my life to be mistakes.
Yeah.
They're risk takes.
Yeah.
I took a risk. If it doesn't work out, then I know better next time, and I figure something else out.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with the growth, the personal growth, the professional all-around growth.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear that too, because there's so many things that you're paralleling that make me know that, like, I'm on that right path. So Ghost Pepper. All right. So it's a consulting. You're consulting with policy, you're consulting with?
Yeah. So we do, some policy consulting work. But really what we do, I look at it as it's communications, it's a branding firm. It's like, what I found over the last 12 years is there are incredible people doing incredible work for people that are struggling or for people that are in recovery. And so often it's like these places that are doing this work are so caught up in the work that their message isn't getting out. They're not connecting with the people that need it. So really what we do is try to help support through communications, through PR, through some government affairs work. Like, how do we lift up the people that are doing good for our community, for people that are still struggling, and get that out there, right? Like, my hope is, and this is like, cheesy or whatever, but like really like what lights me up is, the ability to just change the narrative, right? Like if we can change the way we talk about addiction, or if we can change the way we talk about, the pathways of how people can get better and what those access points are, and, change just, like through that, we can shift any policy, right? But like it comes back to, you have to bring the humanity into it, right? Like you have to tell stories, you have to lift these stories up, because otherwise it's numbers and statistics, and it's, a population of people who are criminalized.
Yep.
And if that, like if you're in that spot, and you go on Google and you don't know what you need, or you don't know where to turn, you might get steered to, a place that's not a fit, right? So my hope is like, if we can change the narrative around what is out there and what recovery looks like, I'll say my experience was going back to that day, October 30th, 2012, like I thought all I was doing was just trying to like take away this opioid, right? I'm just like taking it away. Mm-hmm. And what I've found through recovery is like how much I've gained, right? Like if I never viewed it as a positive, I viewed it as, this punitive thing, right? But I think if we can reframe that and shift it, like, make this life that we've got, that you and I have found, and so many others have on different pathways. Like if we can make that more visible and more appealing, like it's aspirational. It's not a punishment.
And that's what I like to hear as well, because, that those three words right there, changing the narrative.
Yeah.
And it's people like ourselves that, we were never part of that narrative because we weren't supposed to be.
Yeah.
Once again, we weren't supposed to be that person who was running, the streets. We weren't supposed to be that person getting pulled over by the cops and overdosing in cars and doing things that we weren't supposed to be doing, and changing that narrative is so important. And I'm so looking forward to see where this goes and how it goes, because you have made such huge strides in your personal life and the recovery community itself and everything you do. But I'm curious, Ghost Pepper, where did the name, I know what Ghost Pepper is to me, but why Ghost Pepper?
So it really came after an extensive exercise in, like, again, I was doing this passion project, and the hardest part for me was trying to come up with a name. Mm-hmm. So it's, as unexciting as it is, really, like, the idea came from a ghostwriter, right? So like, that's where we got Ghost, was, essentially like one of the things that we do is like help, ghostwrite to change that narrative.
Right.
And then it was really about like, it's a small firm, it's trying to be impactful. I'm not going to go eat a Ghost Pepper. From what I hear though, they're pretty spicy. They're
pretty killer. Yeah. I had one, and I'll
out.
Never have one again.
Yeah. But really it was just about, it's like, how do we come up with something that
it's catchy.
I wanted something that sticks, and like, I wanted something that, is more fun than, again, I think part of like what we're trying to do is like, bring some levity to this. Everything doesn't have to be overly dramatic or aspirational, right? It's like,
it doesn't have to be
it's
black
fun.
and white.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shades of gray in what we do in recovery and stuff.
Yeah. So I think as a brand name, like it just, as soon as I was trying to play with the word ghostwriter, and as soon as I saw Ghost Pepper, it was like, I like it.
That's awesome.
It just stuck.
And you have hats and everything, man. You got merch, you got it all. You got the swag.
Yeah.
I love it. So you're all in, and
We're
that's
all
amazing. It's just to hear your journey like this. Like, I mean, yes, I know it from, the docuseries and the little bits that we shared on there, and who I know of you from social media, but to be able to sit down and peel those layers back and, not even really all about it. But I think what people forget, that when we do talk about our recovery and our years in addiction, that's who we are. And that's brought us to where we are now. Because if not, we'd be telling a different narrative. Totally different. But you are out there. You are a voice for this. You are a voice for yourself. You are a voice for the substance use disorder, the mental health, the policy out there. You do podcasts galore, I see. You just did Carl's podcast. Yeah. Carl and I are connected to our buddy Dave Manheim from Dopey.
Yeah. I was with Dave last week.
Where at?
Up in New York.
With what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I just got connected to Dave.
Really?
Well, so actually, Dave and I have been texting for like a year, maybe more.
Dave's one of the worst texters you're ever going to meet.
Well, I'm the second worst.
Me too.
So,
but Dave will pull this like midnight text. Hey, Britt.
Yeah.
And then it'll be like, I'll pull a 5 a.m. text. Hey, Dave. And then like the next morning, 5 a.m., he'll be like, hey, I'm not responding to you now. I'm going to play this game with you, Dave.
Yeah.
But no, Dave's one of my very good friends. We are huge supporters of each other.
yeah.
But it's okay. So
when I get out of here, I owe him a call because I got that like 7 a.m. yo text from him because I owed him a call.
He's
from
good
before.
at the yo text. That's
Yeah.
what he's good at. Yo, Harry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait till I see. You know what? Just
Well,
yeah.
so when I get in the car, I'm
answer.
going to call him.
Yeah, he won't. If he
Okay.
does, I'm going to be eating my words because he's the worst. Dave Mannheim, you suck at responding to texts just as bad as I do and Harry does apparently, and calls even worse. But no, Dave is one of my very good friends.
Yeah.
He is amazing. I met Carl through him at the last con.
Okay.
Plus Carl does great work out there.
Yeah.
So you're doing really good work as well. You, if people want to learn more about Harry, where can they find you on social media?
So I've got to get more active than I am, but especially in what I do, I work with people on helping them build their social media constantly. The one that I use the most is Instagram, and it's just at Harry Cunnane.
It's easy enough.
And yeah, it's simple.
Simple enough.
But yeah.
And they want to learn about Ghost Pepper. Is there the website?
Yeah, so it's www.ghostpepperco.com.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And there are so many layers I want to peel back still, and I can't because there's only so much time we could do that in.
Yeah.
But if you could go back, Harry, to 12 or 13-year-old Harry, is there anything you would tell 12 or 13-year-old Harry that would change the course of your life now?
That's a good question. I think the first thing that came in my head when you said that was it's going to be all right. That's the first thing that jumped into my head. And then the second thing that came to my mind was, because you mentioned a change, right? Like, I don't know at this point, right? And it's easy in hindsight, but like, I don't think I would want to change any of it. I might have been a little bit less, nervous and anxious and afraid along the way if I could have told myself back then, like, hey, it's going to be all right. But, I think that, the journey that we're all on, right? Like, is something that it's going to continue to change, right? Like I still, and a lot of this like sounds good today. Like I still have a lot, fears. I still have, like brutal days, all of it. We all do, right?
We're still
but
working we're works in progress.
Forever.
Yes.
And if I think I'm not, then, watch out, because then we got a bigger problem. But like, if I look at my outlook today is more of like, I can take that, fear and uncertainty of what's coming, but like, just know that, from the things that we've been through, that I've been through, like, I know that there's going to be big transitions to come, right? But like, it's going to be okay. Right. And the last thing that I want to do is get stuck or stagnant or think I got it all figured out, because the most rewarding thing, like the most growth I've ever gotten has been like in these times of like big leaps of change, whether it worked out or it didn't. I learned a lot from it. And so that's my hope, is to like not allow fear to keep me stuck ever.
Yep. And I love to hear that, because I tell everybody all the time that like, the classroom's everywhere.
Yeah.
The true test comes at the very end.
Yeah.
That's when you stop learning.
Yeah.
And if you stop learning before then there is trouble.
Yeah.
And I love to hear that. I love to hear that humbling part of it as well. And I want to continue to see this journey you're on and grow. And I want to connect again, because this was great. I enjoyed it.
This was a blast.
It really was. I'm glad we did this. And for people who have not seen the docu-series by Brayburn, it is Brayburn. You could get it, check it out. It's on my page. It's also on Harry's, I'm sure, somewhere. Yep. It's a really great docu-series with some really great people doing some really good things. And check out Harry's books, because I'm going to as well. Harry, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. And everybody out there, thanks for joining us. As always, remember, whatever it is you stand for, be a voice. This is Britt Carpenter on Usula Media. Have a great rest of your day.